Okay, my name's Chris, and this is my wife, Andrea. We drove over from Walker, Canada last night, and so we are going to be talking about, we're going to be talking not about baseball, basically. We're going to be talking about all the other stuff. So we're talking about, what makes your presentation authentic in as many aspects as possible, essentially, or makes it seem authentic, I guess I should say, in as many aspects as possible.
It's time to get up.
So we're talking about, and this is really about the team that has done the research and presents baseball as accurately as possible for the time period that they're presenting. But then their players come off the field and give out high fives to their teammates, and they take a chug from a Gatorade bottle and do all those other things that might compromise your credibility with your spectators. So we want to make sure that you don't end up making your team into a meme. Okay, we want to make sure that there's not some photograph or what somebody pulls away from your presentation is some sort of an anachronism, or is one thing that I caught from the mayor just this morning. In his brief interaction here, what he caught on was the name of one of the designs of a bat. That's the piece that he took away from his brief interaction here. So you never know what that spectator is going to take away from your interaction. They may take away something that you really didn't intend for them to take away. So that's what we're going to be talking about first. First, we're going to be going into language, and this isn't really kind of the debating about proper terms. That's not what I'm going to go into here. But when you are in costume, you're using the language of your period as much as possible. So whether it be removing modern references, even things like the banana phone that are nice little baseball inside jokes, but not relevant to the 1860s. Or also just removing those cliches and idioms that are very modern. See you later, stuff like that. That it's difficult, but and it's not about. I advocate anytime you're in your costume, in your uniform, or whatever your period costume is, regardless of whether there's a game going on, regardless of whether there are spectators there. It's just a matter of training yourself. Don't worry about whether someone's there or not. If you're playing baseball, if you're in uniform, put yourself in the proper time period. And the big thing then too is foul language. Now, there are many instances over the course of this where what I'm going to say is not going to be necessarily historically accurate. For some time periods, for some teams, using foul language might be historically accurate. If you're representing a later time period where it's a longshoremen or teamsters or whatever, then they're probably going to be on the field using foul language. But for us, our purpose is, or at least I assume for many groups, is to educate, which means that you're going to have families, you're going to have children, in which case you just need to train yourself. No foul language. This isn't beer league softball. This is vintage baseball. So again, anytime you're in uniform, that's one of your rules. And then at the bottom there are just some of the terms that are used from the 1860 rules. So those are in the rules, so those are safe to use. Another thing is just if you look at any 1860, or any printed material, newspaper, broadsides, that'll give you an idea of at least the written language, so you can see some of the vocabulary that was used. It won't necessarily help you with the manner of speaking, which is always going to be difficult, obviously, from 1860. But it'll at least give you an idea of the vocabulary that was used in print, anyway. Okay, so who are we talking about then for this language? It's not just about players, and so that's one of the things that we're really going to be advocating here. But all those people that are associated with your club. And so here's just a few suggestions of people that we came up with. I don't know, for everyone's club, you might have someone else in addition to these people. But these are just our suggestions. One thing that we really don't often see is actually the interpreter, someone that's a designated interpreter. So that's one thing that we're really going to be talking about. But a lot of times these people serve as interpreters de facto. But anyone on your team should be able to serve as an interpreter, and we'll talk about what that means. So if you're not playing baseball, how do you dress? For gentlemen, it's really easy. We've got it so easy because men's fashion changes so very little. You could really get away with going to the thrift store basically and buying a few things, and they would look very authentic. The only difference between a men's shirt in the late 1800s and the early 1800s is that it's longer. That's basically the only difference. And when your shirt's tucked in, as it should be, no one's ever going to know the fact that my shirt comes down to here instead of coming down to here. But so you want to start with your hat. So again, if you're not playing baseball, you should be wearing a hat, or you should be wearing a hat at any time, men. Always wear a hat. So then basically you set whatever kind of status you'd like to have. If you are going to be a fancy man, if you're going to be a part of the elite or a business person, the top hat would be appropriate. There's a nice little one there. If you're going for something of a lower class, then kind of a floppy hat, which I don't see any over here, but there's one over there in the corner. Kind of like a newsboy cap there. If you're familiar with what the mules or the Wyandotte Stars wear, something like those. The next most important thing then is a vest, because you basically wear a vest at all times too. It's just a difference again of the material to determine what type of vest it would be. A silk vest with tapestry, if you're going with that top hat look, if you're going with kind of the elite status. Otherwise, like a linen, muslin material for just a regular working man vest. And then once you're covered up with the vest, the shirt's not going to matter too much because you're not going to see how deep the buttons go. Definitely long sleeve though. Dark trousers, dark pants, and like I said, men really have it pretty easy. So, and this doesn't have to be reserved for just one person on the field or reserved for the umpire. If you've got a whole bunch of guys, congratulations first of all for your club, but second of all, take turns, rotate those people. If somebody wants to be there for the game, they don't necessarily have to play, or you can take turns too. Maybe have one person. If you're doing a double header, switch costumes in between the game, so that there's everyone has the different experience, and that you definitely have one designated person then to serve in a different capacity. Here's some contemporary examples. I love these guys. They're very stately, facial hair too. It's always nice. But you can see, dark clothing, white shirts. But again, especially with the facial hair, it's really not that much different than modern clothing too, just a longer coat. But anyway, and then some modern interpretations. Then so the tapestry vest here on Mr. Everett. It's pretty. The top hat and your vest are really going to be your major expenses. Now, unfortunately, it's cheap for us, but we don't really get the impression that the ladies get.
I'll talk a little bit about ladies' dress, since a lot of clubs might have ladies who are involved playing from time to time or just there to support your family members. I apologize for the creepy mannequin. Ideally, I was going to wear this, but then this happened, so this will not go on me. So I had to bring the mannequin instead. But ladies don't have it quite as easy because ladies' fashion changes even now by the decade, it seems. So to just go into a thrift store and pick out something that looks old-fashioned is not going to get the same effect for ladies. So if you're interpreting 1860s, the most important thing, I think, is to start out with the dress that has a hoop skirt under it, which this one does. You can get hoop skirts anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 hoops. And the more hoops, the fancier or more formal the attire would be. I really recommend middle of the road. This one has 4. And because you're kind of going for like a business casual type of look, whereas a lady wouldn't come to a baseball game wearing a ball gown, nor would she come to a baseball game wearing a working dress. So, so it's kind of just, you want to kind of shoot for middle of the road. Again, hats are very important. Ladies would always keep their heads covered. This is just a nice straw shade hat. You could also choose something like a straw bonnet or a cloth bonnet. Sun bonnet even at times could be appropriate. So it's just proper decorum for ladies to always have their heads covered when they're outside or when they're in public. So gloves are also appropriate. I liked to wear, I couldn't find mine to bring, but I like to have fingerless kind of open knit, open crochet gloves because it's much cooler for the summertime. Parasol you can use for shade if you don't have a nice shady spot where the gentlemen are playing. If you really want to get into the historical accuracy and you have hair to play with, you can definitely want to try to shoot for a center part in the hair. It's going to be counterintuitive because the center part for women was intended to make the face look wider. Wider face means I have more food to eat, which means I'm wealthier. So you really want to make yourself look as wide and full as possible. Again, it's very counterintuitive. Same with the hoop skirt. Get the waist small because you want to look like you're well fed and can afford that. In terms of undergarments, I have a couple examples here. I have bloomers here, which did not go on the mannequin. That just seemed a little too weird. Actually just bought a pair of like white pants at a thrift store, cut them off and added the eyelet to the bottom. I wear these for playing and for dressing like this. So this was easy. It also cheated. I have a little pocket here so I can carry a few things if I need to. And then a corset, which if you're going to purchase a ready-made dress, you need to watch because a lot of ready-made dresses actually will say in the description, you must wear this with a corset. This dress will not fit me if I'm not wearing the corset. So, and this is just like a working or more casual. It's not the stiffest that you can get it. It's not like metal or anything, so it's not too painful. But if you have to cheat somewhere, and this goes for men and women, cheat on what people won't be able to see. Again, for this outfit here, I'm missing an underskirt or an under petticoat and an over petticoat because I'm supposed to have a petticoat or a skirt underneath the hoop skirt and in between the hoop skirt and the dress. Since that's not something that people see, I haven't invested in those pieces yet. Maybe someday. But again, if you're going to cheat, if you have to wear, guys, if you have to wear a pair of pants that have a zipper on it, obviously that's not period correct, but it's not going to be a glaring, obvious miss in your entire costume. So, I think I got through all that. So, a few contemporary examples, just pictures of women from the time. You can see all the center parts on their hair. You can see just kind of the general idea of a long sleeve dress with a long full skirt with a hoop underneath. Obviously when you look at old photographs you can't see color, but if you stick to kind of just quieter colors, that's usually your safest bet. Just so you're not doing something that really could be wrong. So that's what I've stuck to here. It's kind of a nice greenish brown. So, and then a couple examples of me at different matches. So this one over here kind of shows like the straw bonnet as opposed to the straw hat. So again, both of those are appropriate. Hats are another thing that you can look a lot at old photographs to see what was available. So where do we start for getting some of these costumes? And again, this is going beyond, you know, what the normal baseball interpretation is. So if you have the extra people who want to participate in something like this, here's some places to get started for costuming. VBBA Lady is a store in Gettysburg, which I had the fortunate experience to visit one time. But if you can't visit, they do have an online store. They will make a dress specific to your measurements. They also have pre-made dresses that are available for purchase that you can buy. They have different fabrics that you can choose from too. So that's definitely an option. They also have lots of different accessories. So parasols, fans, gloves, undergarments. My hoop skirt actually came from there. So that's one place that you can start. You can buy patterns and sew yourself. Pastpatterns.com is an online store where you can buy patterns from the 1860s and actually lots of time periods. I will tell you, she's based out of Dayton, Ohio area. So, but it's not for the novice seamstress or sewer. So maybe you have someone who wants to be involved in your club in a behind-the-scenes manner, a mom or a grandma or an aunt or a sister who likes to sew and is good at sewing. This is definitely for the more advanced seamstress, but that's definitely a way that somebody can be involved in your club, is to help make costumes, not just for the players, but for all the people who are involved with the club. James Townsend and Son, which the website is up here too. This is for men only, because the time period that this focuses on is 1710 to 1840. So if you stick to the later part, guys can get away with it. Sorry, ladies, you can't. Too much change between 1840 and 1860. But again, shirts, trousers, some hats would definitely be available through that site as well. Where's the laptop bag? No, I need that other one. Okay. There's a publication in the mid-1800s called Godey's Ladies Book, and it's basically a book of fashion plates. So like maybe your modern or your 1860s Vogue. So I'm passing it around so you can just kind of get a general idea of the types of fashions that were available. That's a great resource to look at for women's fashion, and there would be the occasional man in Godey's Ladies Book as well. So, but if that's a place that you want to go for inspiration, I really recommend that. Daguerreotypes, tintypes, photographs that we had some examples of earlier. Just doing a Google search to find Civil War women, Civil War men. You can put in your decade and search that way. That's a great way to look at the dress of the time period. This sounds totally sacrilegious for a historian, but there are even movies that you can watch that have great material cultural references, like the 1995 Little Women with Susan Sarandon is a great example of mid-19th century material culture, Abraham Lincoln, sorry. So you can find good, valuable gems in popular media as well. eBay is a place that you can buy costumes. My dress here is actually from a woman who made and sold it on eBay. So you can find good things on eBay. You can also find terrible things on eBay. So I have an example here. So I searched for Civil War gown on eBay. I came up with this item description. Beautiful vintage Cinderella Southern Belle fantasy style gown. Okay, Southern Belle is in there, sure. Just be really careful of your search terms and what you're looking at on eBay. So when someone lists something on eBay, they're trying to pull in as many people as they can to look at their item to bid on. So this was the dress that they were advertising. So you just want to be really careful. Pioneer shows up on a lot of different dresses on eBay. So the more research that you do into like the Godey's Ladies Book or looking at old photographs, the more you're just going to know that is not right. And anything else that you look at, that fantasy shows up a lot too. If you've ever been to like a Renaissance fair, no rules. So you just wear something that looks historic and you're good. We don't want to portray that image, if at all possible. If you want to go above and beyond, if you want to have a full, complete experience for your spectators that goes just beyond the field of play, this is one way that you can start. So, does anyone have any questions about costuming for non-players?
You have an idea of the price range for a typical lady's dress?
This one was $70. This one that I bought on eBay. I think the Abraham's Lady, the pre-made ones, run about $130. Custom ones can go up to probably $200. My hoop skirt was $40, I think. So.
How about shoes?
Shoes. I brought my shoes. My shoes are actually from the thrift store. I was able to find some great button ankle boots. But a boot is a good idea, or like a slipper, like a slip-on slipper, which is convenient now because that is kind of a popular style, like a slip-on flat. You just want to go for like this muted
Riding
colors,
boots
browns,
work.
blacks.
Riding horseback riding boots.
Riding boots work
great.
as well. So it's sometimes you can find a treasure, sometimes you can't. So yeah. And does that answer the question?
I was going to talk about kids. I know a lot of you probably played the Grinders, and the Grinders have a whole family of kids that dress up, and I've watched these kids go from little tiny babies to now this big, and their mom and dad do an amazing job, and they really set the tone even better than the grown-ups do. And obviously there's a lot less material in the kids' clothing, and if you have a whole family of kids, you can keep handing them down.
Oh yeah, I can't believe we didn't do more on that. So,
yeah. We've got 4 little girls. Well, actually, the oldest one is 12 now. Well, you'll have someone in costume very soon.
Yes, well, we already have 2.
So I think it just sets a great tone. I love to show up at a game and see a bunch of kids dressed up. It's a lot easier than for us, and they are into it.
They are. We have a 3-year-old daughter, and she got a new dress this year from Grandma. So, and kids are easy. Like we actually got a gown type thing for our first one, who's now 3, doesn't fit it anymore, but it's basically just a white shift, and boys, girls, it's appropriate for both, because diaper changes are so much easier in a shift than they are in buttons and snaps, and so I like when they're dressed for games. So,
the public loves it too.
They
love
do.
to see the kids
They really
dressed
do.
up.
Can I ask what a shift is?
It's just like a dress.
A dress with
type
no
thing.
waistband.
Yeah, dress with no waistband. It has a drawstring collar and drawstring sleeves, and there's folds, hems, additional hems on the bottom that you can let out as the children grow. We actually got it at the fair at New Boston. It's a 1790 to 1810 settler fair in Springfield, Ohio. So again, not the time period, but again, children, something like that is not going to change nearly as much. So. Any other questions about costuming?
Well, now that you have those people in costume, what do? Well, they're going to be your interpreters then. No matter what their designated job is, whether they're an umpire or a tally keeper or a mascot, but what they really need to be doing is interpreting the game for you.
And I kind of come at this portion of it having worked as a historical interpreter at a museum for 2.5 years. It's not signing, and it's not translating into different languages. I always get that a lot. So I didn't mean to take over. So okay. So we just really recommend having an interpreter. Again, I like the idea of everyone taking a turn. The idea of being an interpreter is that you are all already experts at the game of baseball, how you play it. You interpret it on the field, you know the rules, so you can consider yourself an expert. So you don't have to be afraid to go up and talk to anybody, because 9.9 times out of 10, you know way more about it than they do. And so, as an expert on the game, be out and be talking to people. You can explain the game as it happens. You want to talk about that a little bit, Chris? Or
Well, and one thing that I often advocate for is when you're playing the game, make mistakes, do things that
Don't guarantee a hit.
well, do things that deliberately demonstrate the differences in the game. You know, do a fair foul, overrun first base. You know, do something that's going to draw attention to it, and then make sure that someone, you know, the interpreter or someone in that's speaking with the crowd or with the crowd is able to point that out. Because if you, I mean, you could easily go through a 9-inning game and miss all the differences. I mean, if everything goes according to plan and people do what they're supposed to do, it's not nearly as educational as if someone screws up. So I would hope that everyone in this room, especially since you're here at this conference, would be willing to make yourself look like a fool for 15 minutes, or hopefully not 15 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, or give yourself up for an out so that the people that are there watching the game learn from it. And hopefully none of your teammates would tease you too much if they know what you're doing. But even just walking through, even just having an umpire or an interpreter walk through, carrying a basket, holding a ball like this. I mean, I set out a ball over here, and I don't even know what that is. I think that's a napkin ring that I picked up that we just use as the curtain ring. It just keeps the ball from rolling away on us. But just setting that out someplace, that draws people up. It drew someone up here. She came up to look at the ball. You know, if you have this, you know, touching is so much more for learning. If I'm able to touch the ball, then I can instantly compare it to what I know a regular baseball, a modern baseball feels like, and that makes it easier for me. That makes it something that I can connect to much more easier than simply watching it.
Yeah, if you look up here, I've got the cone of learning, kind of technical, but so as you can see, at the top of the pyramid, it would just be someone reading something. So if they were to read about vintage baseball or something, they're only going to remember about 10% of that after 2 weeks. But then as we go downward, the more that you increase your interaction with the people who are watching the game, the more they're going to remember up to 90% 2 weeks later. So watching a demonstration, coming to a game, you can hit 50%. But if they're simulating, doing the real thing, touching, experiencing, that's what's going to get you up to 90% of what they remember. So again, as you increase your interaction with your spectators, the more valuable information they're going to remember and take away. Do you want to go back to the... No, I think we... Sorry. Go ahead.
One thing that I did back in my playing days when I was more active is I would do much more than just baseball games. And I hope that's one thing that if you're not doing already, that you're thinking about doing. I would do talks in high schools and colleges, talking to history classes about vintage baseball. We participated in parades. We did living history demonstrations. So at events where there wasn't a large enough area to play a game, we would just set up for a small demonstration. You would not have a full club, maybe 3 or 4 players using kids. They just like to run around and run the bases, maybe just swing the bat, and then that gives you the opportunity then to talk to the parents. Gives you a nice 5-minute interaction to talk about the game of baseball and share with them that way. Yeah, I think we did recruit someone that way too. Summer camps is another way too. We would play a game through a summer camp at the outdoor living history park. Young kids, it only took a couple people, but they really had a lot of fun with it, and they got to have ice cream afterwards. One thing I noticed when we came in yesterday, and I'm going to borrow this one over here, is what I saw that the Huntington Club is passing out, which I hadn't seen this before when we were making this presentation.
It's filled with lies and incorrect information.
I heard differently, man.
But we do definitely advocate that people hand out information, and we got a few other samples here too. Pass these around. But so again, is it historically accurate? No, because at an amateur baseball game, they probably wouldn't be handing out free literature. They wouldn't probably be taking that expense. But again, our role is to educate. So we want to make sure that somebody has something in their hands that it triggers a memory. So when they go home, it's something that they can talk about with their friends and family as a way to talk about the game. But you do want to do it in a historically accurate way. And so we've got some examples here then from 1860 and 1864 to show you how the font is laid out. And you can see from the Huntington sheet, if you have that, it's pretty simple. The fonts basically get smaller and larger. Fonts get smaller and larger, but they're generally pretty simple, not a lot of graphics. Here are two that are a little bit later, so there's a little bit more to it, but still they're fairly simple. One thing that I would also cheat onto is that there's a tendency, you can see it in the Huntington publication, to use like a really small font.
Which is totally historically
That's accurate, but you might lose a lot of information because people's eyesight. Not that it's worse now than it was then, but you really should try to make it a larger font just for people to be able to read it. So, try to move through this quickly. But one thing, we got some plastic bottles when we came out here, so
trying to trick us.
we got rid of them. So we went with our glass bottles here, and then I've got my, I don't know where my beverage stack went. I think it's on the floor over there. And so then we just hid our plastic bottles down here in the cooler. So, you need to have beverages, especially when you're playing in July and August, we understand that. But it's very easy to hide them. So just provide tin cups or a crock, something like that for your beverages. If you need to have, bottles of Gatorade, or after the game, if you need to have some cans of beer available, you just hide them in something like this. I picked this up at Kroger. This was about $100. I think they also have them at TSC. So this is just a metal cooler that's encased in this wooden box. If you don't like this, or if it's not available for you, you can actually build one. There's instructions online where you can just use a styrofoam cooler and then just build a wooden box around it. It's very simple, pretty cheap, and it has a great look after all. And then you can actually use it for other purposes too. Other than we also have, I just have these wooden boxes here.
I can't stop him from looking for things. Like, we're not even officially affiliated with the club anymore, but like 2 weeks ago we were at IKEA and he sees something that's like, oh, that would be great for baseball. So we've always got our eyes out for what can be used at a baseball match.
Basket, box, chest. They don't necessarily have a specific purpose, but they are all easily used to throw cell phones and keys, tennis shoes, so that if you have to have something out readily available near your player's area, it's out of the way, but it's also safe too. So you don't have to worry about someone coming out and grabbing your cell phone, but you also don't have to worry about the spectators seeing it sitting there next to your straw bale.
Which is another thing. Does your club have a policy on who's allowed to be on the bench or on the straw bales, ahead of that towards the field? When we were involved with the Quadbusters, the rule was that if you weren't in costume, you didn't go on or in front of the benches. Is to keep the field areas authentic as possible. And which is why, speaking of our kids, which is why you would often see us, come to matches dressed like this. Which, you can't really see, it's kind of dark. But just so that they had the freedom to go and talk to Daddy during a match, or be in the picture afterwards. So, and again, they loved it too. One thing that I want to make clear is we're talking about costumed people versus not costumed people. If you have an interpreter and they don't have a costume, that's fine. Your interpreter doesn't have to be wearing a costume. If they don't want to make the investment, they don't know they're going to be able to be available to do it all the time, and $200 can be a lot to drop into a hobby like this. But I will say that from my experience working as a historical interpreter, if we want to think back to that cone of learning, the amount of interaction and receptiveness of somebody on a tour would increase like tenfold based on whether or not I was wearing a costume. So if I'm wearing a costume, I just seem more approachable, more interesting, more intriguing, and people would just be more connected to me and more interactive with me if I was in a costume. So not to say that I wasn't giving them the right information wearing modern clothes or my work polo shirt, something like that. But it does increase interaction and enhance the experience. So that's why we have gone into all this about costuming. So.
And that's even outside of the historic setting. That's even if you're in the Capitol Building Visitor Center or in Anacostia, the place where people die on NCIS. Andrea has worn her vintage.
A hoop skirt at the Capitol Building guarantees you a pat down in a private room. Just so
But even in those settings, you don't feel comfortable enough because you're dressed like that to walk up to you and ask you questions.
I'm pretty sure there were some gang members coming up and talking to me about my hoop skirt. I guess it just makes you look like a nice, approachable person.
Would they call that street cred?
Yes. Here's an example of some refreshment options. So we got a ceramic crock with some tin cups sitting on a wooden table available. Here's another point where we don't want you to be totally historically accurate because that would mean an oaken bucket with one ladle that everybody shares.
That was drawn from a well.
Yeah, we don't advocate that in any way. Again, an example of some ways to outfit your sidelines, hay bales for a bench.
I think I'm going to skip over most of this. We're not necessarily advocating first-person interpretation. If you do, it's very
A
difficult.
lot of training.
But also know something about your time period. In particular, your community in the time period that you're interpreting. So, is it that's going to be very different based on where you are in the country. So, industrial, agricultural, immigrant communities, native-born citizens, have some information about that, so that because it is more than just baseball. All right. So, who here plays 1860 rules at their home field? All right. Okay. 1860. Who's president in 1860?
Buchanan.
James Buchanan. There you go. There you go. Here's your prize, Sarah. All right.
I take back most of what I wrote in the paper about you.
All right. Who plays 1869 rules? Who's president in 1869?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Grant. Very good. No wrong answers. We did everything we could. All right. Okay. So good work. So we're not asking you to be history experts, but it would be a little bit awkward if you knew, exactly when someone started a slide, in this month of this particular year, but you don't know who the president is. So just make sure that you have some sort of historic balance there so that you're not wholly invested in just one small subject area and you don't have any concept of what else is going on in the world, like social movements, abolitionism.
A war, maybe.
Yeah.
Giant war going
So
on.
have some concept of everything else that's going on, especially because those things are relevant to the evolution of baseball.
And then lastly, just we're still just escaping the vacuum of just baseball itself. And think about what other kinds of historic demonstrations you could incorporate into your visitor experience, your spectator experience. Again, it's a little dark, but this is a picture of me churning butter at one of the baseball matches. And again, it got down to the bottom part of that cone where we're adding touch and taste, adding more senses to the experience. Just churning butter and giving people something else to remember about their experience at the baseball game. Ice cream churns, the hand-cranked wooden ice cream churns, those were invented in the 1830s. So it's completely appropriate to, if you can get your hands on one of those. I got one on eBay for about $40 or $50. Make ice cream and give out small little Dixie cup samples to people during the game. Chris has a drop spinning kit that I purchased a long time ago and never learned how to do. But demonstrate, that's something where you can spin wool into yarn. Show just some kind of trades of the time. If you want to bake a batch of hardtack, Depending on what recipe you look at, 2, maybe 3 ingredients, flour, water, and salt. I guarantee you, your spectators will never forget that experience of tasting hardtack. And if you make it this season, you might still have some 6 years from now that you can still hand out because it keeps forever. So again, it's a really simple thing that you can do to add to what your spectators are experiencing. That goes beyond the game of baseball, but kind of encompasses the whole time period. And again, your roaming interpreters, if they choose to wear a costume, they're in and of themselves costume displays. I've answered lots and lots of questions about my dress, my getup, as some people call it. Most of them being, aren't you hot? And I'm sure you've all heard that. Just what exactly are you wearing? And, it's just another great conversation starter. So, does anyone have any other questions about the non-baseball experience of, maybe actually the non-game experience?
If you're female, you can totally get away with this. I do it all the time. If somebody asks you who the president is or how many states there are in the union or whatever, ladies don't trouble their heads with politics. And so you can just say that and then move on. And it's really simple. So, I mean, it's not going to work for the men, but it definitely I used to am from Chicago, I voted 4 times on Tuesday, so, But the other thing that's really fun is if you're at an event that someone else is managing, if you work ahead of time with them and tell them what foods are appropriate. If they're going to have a grill, would they please serve pork sandwiches instead of serving hot dogs and hamburgers? And would they have popcorn instead of having chips? Or would they have pretzels instead of having chips? And you can just give some little, and it really negligible cost, but have lemonade please and sarsaparilla or root beer in brown bottles rather than having soda pop. And most people that you deal with, if they're doing the food, if you just give them some hints and just give them some ideas, they'll go with it. Sometimes people get jerky, but usually they'll say, yeah, we can do pork sandwiches instead of doing hot dogs.
Actually, jerky would be appropriate.
Jerky would be appropriate, yeah, exactly, yeah.
So, and actually that goes right into the last thing that we want to do is just give you all the opportunity. I just have a few minutes left, but if anyone else has something that they do with their club that they'd like to share, we turn these last few minutes into just some idea sharing and brainstorming. So we open that up now.
Just a point of history. Unfortunately, we haven't had too much of a problem, but tobacco was used, and it was used quite a bit. But it was used as chewing tobacco or pipes or cigars. Cigarettes were definitely out in the 1860s. I don't know how many times I've told our guys, if you got to smoke, go back to the parking lot and smoke. Don't carry a cigarette around the bench area.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah,
Are you saying that for me, Gib?
Yeah, I brought my own for one of my players who smokes, and I was actually Huntington. I was here, and I was in your little tent area, the covered area, and I was rolling smokes for pipes, and a couple of your ladies were really curious as to what exactly the boss lady was doing with it. It made for an interesting conversation piece, but no, I swear it was tobacco. It really was. But if you do have somebody that smokes, if you can get them to roll their own, or if you hit a Civil War encampment, they'll have those. They're like little tiny, what I call Clint Eastwood's cigars, the little tiny brown ones, which are really a lot more like cigarettes. And if you can get guys to smoke those instead of smoking the regular white cigarettes, it's helpful. Of course, they'll get really, really stoned on them because I guess they're very, very strong as cigarettes go. I don't know. I don't smoke.
after the match.
Yeah, after. Yeah, we don't want people missing the ball, but yeah, that works.
And again, we didn't want to come here today to be police. We're not coming here to tell you you're doing the wrong thing at your matches. We just wanted to give you ideas and resources for making a fuller experience at all of your matches. So hopefully there's something that you can take away. Start with one thing. If you're interested in doing this for your club, if you don't already, start with one thing. Start with, one interpreter costume, and go from there. Yeah.
I'd like to give a short list from my own club of things not to do. I think that might help solidify this. So, let's see here. sweatpants that are the same color as the club's pants. Silk pants that are thinner than, I don't know, a very worn shirt, in the same color of the club's pants. Water bottles, plastic, with modern labels, aluminum cans on the we'll call it the bench area, multiple iterations of a cap or a hat that are anywhere from something that was the modern baseball type cap, we'll call it, anywhere back to people just putting up the hair in a very modern fashion as far as shaving out sides, or I think they had one person with a small faux spike at once. You know, those types of things, even when you've got all that happening in one spot, just tend to break the effort that everybody else makes. So, you know, if you get the chance and you can say something to somebody, do it. It's going to be awkward. It's going to suck saying it, but it's really for the benefit of everyone else.
I think that if we take, I like to take the position, the way that I've created my character, and that I take care of the club and what I do, is I like to tell people that we are just as, we do the same thing that all these Civil War reenactors do. We've all been seen Civil War reenactors in our travels as vintage ballists, and they have a fever. If we had that same fever, it would be much better, but we don't. We're not as financially disposed, perhaps, as they are. But what I like to tell people, the cranks and the bugs, is that we do the same thing that they do. This is, you know, why do you do this? I do the same thing that Civil War recreators do, because I love baseball. The only difference between them and us is that the Civil War guys know who's going to win the battle, and with this vintage baseballist, we don't know who's going to win till the match is over. And I think that's how, if we start from the moment that we hit the field, to the moment we pass that bench area, and we keep that idea, we're going to all be on the same page. And I think that that's very important. We play several venues each year that include teams that aren't really vintage ball teams, that are they're made up of local politicians.
Don't get the boss lady started on those Wednesday night softballers.
And so, you know, we meet a lot of people in Chicago where 16 in softball was born and their softball mentality. We try to eliminate that from not only our team, but our opponents as well. So we've seen teams come and go over the years that came together as softball teams that tried to become a vintage baseball team, and they didn't make it until they changed that mindset. So we have to have a certain mindset that we become 1858 our rules, mid-19th century ladies and gentlemen that are interested in baseball. And I think that's how I've taken it over my 20 years being involved in the sport.
It's a great attitude.
And I'm going to connect back to that with, and a little bit more with costuming. I used to wear black slacks, Converse shoes, because I had nothing better to wear. I switched to cleats later, and our uniform shirt, and just looked like one of the guys. And just last year, I switched to combination bloomers, hoop skirt, riding boots, knee socks, and
Yeah, you'll see her later. She looks adorable in her uniform. It's adorable.
But it's made a difference in actually how I play and how I act on the field. It's made an entire difference being a woman on a men's team. In my hoop, I look adorable.
It sure does. It's cute.
But it makes a difference in the way I feel about the game too, because I'm more connected and more.
And she has a persona now that makes sense. She's a girl playing the game. She's not trying to dress up and look like she's a guy. And it gives her more to talk to the cranks about when she's
Everyone
not
always asks if
there.
I'm a cheerleader, and that's all.
I hate
because
that.
it's like a knife in the heart. Oh, are you the cheerleader? Mm.
No, I play first base.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun.
Okay, well, that's the end of our time. So thank you for coming out, and
Great
Enjoy your
job,
next
Christy.
2 sessions.